She braced for death at human hands, but instead she felt a gentle touch. The colony had been dead for 14 years, but this morning a signal came, jagged, corrupted, and faint. It barely registered on his cracked receiver, but it was real, and it was enough. Lior Nien crossed the last stretch of ice-blasted plain under a bruised violet sky, wind clawing at his coat, boots sinking deep in the frozen grit. The terraforming had failed decades ago. Oxygen levels were barely tolerable, and every breath left his lungs raw. His scarf was soaked from frozen condensation, stiff against his jaw. Each step was deliberate, exhausting. He was burning more calories than he could spare. But he didn't stop. He'd spent years walking through the bones of forgotten worlds, sifting ash and silence for answers no one wanted anymore. But Artis L4 had once promised something else, a dream, a haven for creators. He remembered the news feeds, artists painting gravity-suspended murals, composers writing symphonies for wind and steel, sculptors shaping stone with sound. Now it was dust, another failed project buried in snow and classified reports. So why had that signal flickered to life? Lior adjusted the pack strap over his aching shoulder, fingers stiff from cold. The signal had come from somewhere near the old gallery quadrant. He passed through a corridor where shattered murals lined the walls like broken windows into a brighter past. The color had drained from them long ago. All that remained were smudges of beauty, the fingerprints of a civilization that once believed in more than survival. He paused by a rusted steel support beam, steadying his breath. His oxygen monitor blinked yellow. Time to rest, time to turn back. But something deeper, something heavier than reason, kept his feet moving. He passed the threshold into the central dome. The ceiling was fractured, snow tumbling in slow spirals through the breach. A tangle of collapsed beams divided the space into jagged sections. Statues lay half-buried in frost, their faces eroded by wind and time. He moved slowly, quietly. Some part of him still expected to hear voices here. Music, laughter, maybe the quiet hum of creation. Instead he heard breathing, not the wind, not the sigh of settling dust. It was short, shallow, labored. He froze. No movement, but it came again. A soft intake of air, ragged and trembling. Then, a whisper, a real voice. Lior drew his revolver on instinct, raising it slowly, scanning the shadows. He followed the sound, around the broken wall of what had once been an observation gallery. One step, two, past shattered glass. And then he saw her. Curled against the far wall, half shielded by the wreckage of a display stand, was a figure, slight, trembling, barely covered in scraps of cloth. Her skin was a soft, unnatural blue, marked with splotches of bruising. Her arms were folded tightly around her knees, ribs showing sharp beneath the thin flesh. A length of rusted chain ran from a metal collar at her throat to a support pipe bolted into the wall. Her hair, jet black, long, matted with frost, hung in curtains around her downturned face. Lior's breath caught. His pulse surged. She was alive. She hadn't seen him yet, not clearly, but as he stepped closer, her head jerked up. Her eyes met his, and everything inside him went still. They were the most human eyes he'd seen in years, not in shape, in expression, terror, exhaustion, and worse, acceptance. Her voice cracked through the cold, barely audible, like a sound torn from the past. "Please, don't kill me." Lior didn't move. Her shoulders trembled. She lowered her gaze again. If you must hurt me," she said, her voice shaking, "make it fast." Every part of him wanted to look away. He couldn't. The collar around her neck was the kind used for biological specimen tracking. Old tech, now illegal. The chain was fused to the wall with oxidized welding. Whoever left her here hadn't expected her to live, and still she did. He lowered the gun slowly. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, voice hoarse from the dry air. She didn't react. The wind shrieked through a break in the dome overhead. Snow sifted onto his shoulders. Lior took a careful step forward. She flinched, folding tighter into herself. Her knees pressed to her chest, her fingers clutching the edge of the chain. He knelt beside her, slowly, hands visible, movements deliberate. Then he unzipped his coat, the only real insulation he had, and draped it around her thin frame. She didn't reach for it, just stared at the floor. "You'll freeze," he murmured. "Take it." She stayed motionless for a long moment. Then tentatively, her fingers moved. She clutched the coat tighter around herself, Her hands were ice. He stood and backed away, giving her space, then crossed to the far side of the gallery and began gathering scraps. Twisted metal, cracked plastic tiles, anything dry. His breath clouded in the air, shallow and fast. He found a discarded fuel cell, cracked but leaking trace vapors, enough for flame. He started a fire inside a rusted basin once used for melted snow. She watched him the whole time. He offered no questions, no orders, no touch, just warmth. From his pack, he retrieved a ration cube, his last one, and set it near the flames. The heat slowly softened it into something edible. He placed it between them. "Eat," he said simply. She didn't move, just stared. Then, cautiously, as if waiting for a trap, she reached. Her fingers brushed the plate. She pulled the food closer and took a small bite. The effect was immediate. Her shoulders jerked. Her mouth moved awkwardly, unused to chewing. She tried to swallow too fast and choked, coughing hard. He moved a hand instinctively, then stopped himself. She wasn't ready for help. She coughed again, blinking back tears, and still she ate. Lior looked away, giving her space. The fire crackled softly. The sound was alien here, among the bones of art and frost. She didn't speak again. Not until the food was gone. Not until the silence had settled thick and heavy again. Then, barely louder than the flames, she whispered, "Why?" Lior turned to her. Her voice was raw, her eyes glassy. "Why didn't you?" He didn't answer. Not yet, because how could he explain the way her voice had cracked, the way her fear had felt so familiar? He sank to the floor beside the fire. "I didn't come here to find anyone," he said at last. "But I heard your signal." She blinked, confused. "I broke the transmitter," she said, "so no one would come." "Not well enough." She stared at him, then looked down at her hands. Blue, thin, bruised. He saw the chain then, how tight it bit into her skin. The collar's metal had rusted through with blood. He drew a tool from his belt and stepped closer. "No," she gasped, shrinking back. "I'm just getting the chain off," he said gently. She hesitated, then nodded, barely. The bolt cracked loose with a rusted snap. The chain slithered to the ground like a dying thing. She didn't move, didn't run, just sat, trembling, coat around her like a cocoon. "You're free now," he said. She looked up at him and whispered, "Then why do I still feel afraid?" Lior stared at her. He had no answer, only a matching question buried deep inside his chest. She leaned her head back against the wall, eyes closing slowly. He knew she wasn't asleep. Not yet. Her breathing was too careful, her body too rigid. But she was trying, and that meant something. Before he turned back to the fire, she spoke one last time. Quiet. Strange. "Are you one of the artists?" Lior stiffened. Her voice trembled again. "I dreamed of them sometimes, before it got cold." He said nothing. But when he looked down, his hand had already found the edge of his sketch pad in his coat pocket. He hadn't drawn in years. And now, somehow, he didn't want to stop. The fire hissed low. The heat stone inside it was nearly spent, and cold had crept back in, curling around the edges of the shattered gallery like a warning. Lior didn't sleep much that night. He sat slumped against a rusted beam, one hand still resting loosely on the butt of his revolver, though he hadn't drawn it since he'd dropped to his knees in front of her. The girl hadn't moved, not really. She'd eaten, curled tighter into his coat, watched him in silence until her eyes eventually slipped shut, not from trust, he was sure, but from exhaustion. Her breathing was too careful, too even. No one truly at peace breathes like that. He'd seen soldiers breathe like that. Survivors. Outside, the wind howled through the fractured dome, a cold, dry sound that cut through everything, even memory. At one point, maybe midnight, maybe earlier, she stirred. Her hand twitched where it gripped the coat. He didn't move, just opened his eyes and looked at her. She hadn't screamed, hadn't run, just whimpered once in her sleep and went still again. By morning, the fire was out. The cold bit deep again. Lior sat up, bones stiff, spine aching from the concrete. His back cracked audibly as he stood. Frost clung to the ends of his boots. His scarf was stiff with frozen breath. He checked his oxygen gauge, still green, barely. She was awake when he turned, barely moving. But her eyes were open, black and lucid, and trained on him without blinking. Lior nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement. She didn't return it, but her gaze didn't flinch away either, a sliver of progress. I need to find supplies, he said. His voice came out low, unused. Food, fuel, filters. She said nothing. He started gathering his things, his pack, half-frozen gloves, his now empty ration wrapper. As he bent to check the revolver cylinder, he heard it. Will you come back? It wasn't a question she wanted to ask. He straightened, turned. She sat very still, shoulders squared, head bowed slightly. She wasn't asking because she wanted him back. She was asking because she was afraid of what would happen if he didn't return. I will, he said. I'm not leaving without you. Her jaw moved, but she said nothing. He didn't press it, just turned and left through the hall of cracked pillars, where fractured sunlight filtered in through the remains of Articel 4's once grand design. The corridors deeper in were choked with debris and ice. Ceiling panels hung like dead skin. The occasional flicker of a broken warning light still blinked overhead, their emergency charge somehow still pulsing after all these years. He moved slow, deliberate. The old colonial complex had been large, but it had also been abandoned violently. He could feel it. There were no signs of an orderly shutdown, just chaos. Tables left mid-meal, storage rooms half-emptied. Some kind of panic had swept through here like a flood. In what had once been a communal kitchen, Lior found 2 sealed nutrient packs, both covered in dust but intact. He stuffed them into his pack, along with 2 small thermal cells from a wall unit that sparked weakly when tapped. He didn't stop to rest. The girl was still back there in the cold, without a weapon or a second voice. By the time he returned, the sun, what little of it pierced the icy sky, had shifted. The light in the gallery had grown harsher, slicing through broken window panes at hard angles. She was where he left her, but her posture was different, more upright. She tracked his return like someone who hadn't decided whether to be relieved. I found food, he said, and heat. He lit one of the thermal cells near her with a quick twist and press. The chemical pad inside hissed, glowing orange. She flinched as the warmth reached her, then slowly shifted closer. He set the ration pack down and backed away, giving her space. Her fingers shook as she opened it. The smell, bland, metallic, vaguely like grain, rose into the cold air. She took a bite, chewed slowly. Halfway through, she paused, closed her eyes. Then, you came back. He looked at her. Yes. Why? Lior sat down near the fire, arms wrapped around his knees. I gave my word. She studied him. It wasn't the answer she expected. He could see it in the way her mouth pressed into a tighter line. Your kind don't usually keep promises. He nodded once. They don't. They sat in silence again. A few more bites passed. Then her voice. My name? She hesitated. He waited. They called me Subject 31. Lior exhaled, a soft sound, almost a laugh, not cruel, just broken. You have a real name? Her eyes flicked toward him. Not a glare, not exactly. Yes, but I haven't spoken it in a long time. Then don't say it yet, not until it's safe again. She looked at him for a long time and then, just barely, nodded. You're human, she said softly, but not like them. Lior didn't answer. He reached into his pack and pulled out a folded piece of thick paper, his sketch pad, opened it. On the second page, faint graphite lines had begun to take shape. Not fully formed, a silhouette. A woman curled in a coat. The beginnings of long black hair falling like ink across the page. Her eyes caught it. Is that me? He didn't hide it. He nodded once. You made me. Look whole. You are. I'm not. You could be. Silence again. But it wasn't cold this time. You're an artist? She asked. I was. Why not anymore? He closed the sketchpad carefully, tucked it away. Because I made beauty for people who burned it. That seemed to shake her more than anything else. She shifted on the floor, tucking her feet beneath her, coat wrapped close. Then, after a pause, then we are the same. Lior frowned. She looked up. They called me dangerous. A psionic threat. They said I made them see things that weren't real. Did you? Number I made them feel, just once, and it scared them. Lior stared at her. You feel everything? He asked. She hesitated, then gave a small, solemn nod. I used to feel what others did. Pain, grief, loneliness. But when I tried to show them what they'd done, they thought I was attacking. They were afraid of their own reflection. Yes, she said softly. Even their own sorrow. Lior sat very still. Why didn't you die? He asked quietly. Out there, chained, alone. She looked up. Her voice was so soft it nearly vanished in the wind. Because I broke the signal, but not completely. A part of me still wanted to believe someone different might come. She met his eyes now. And you did. Lior couldn't speak. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because in that moment, something in him shifted, just slightly. The crack that had run through his soul for so long had stopped growing. It hadn't healed, but it had heard a voice, a different voice, and it hadn't turned away. The wind outside rose again, howling against the dome. But inside, the fire held. And for the first time in years, Lior Nyen stayed, not because of guilt or duty, but because something here was still alive, and it had chosen not to give up. The storm came in just after dusk. A whiteout, fine-grained and fast, sweeping down from the northern ridge like a wave of erasure. Lior sealed the gallery's inner door just in time, bracing his shoulder against the warped metal until the magnetic lock caught with a reluctant hum. Snow slapped against the outer panels, hissing through broken seals, stinging even in the low pressure. The temperature inside the dome dropped another 5 degrees in under a minute. He turned from the door, breath harsh in the cold air. She was standing now, just a few feet from where she'd been sitting before, hands tucked inside his coat, her long black hair still wet from melted frost. Her frame looked even thinner in the gray light, but there was a steadiness in how she watched him now. Not confidence, but presence. A decision to stay standing, even if she wasn't sure why. He wiped his gloves on his thighs and nodded toward the fire. The storm will bury the corridor. We'll be sealed in for a while. She nodded, a small, mute movement, then looked toward the ceiling, where the dome's fracture let in a faint glow, distorted by snowfall. The light flickered like an old signal. Lior crossed to the pack he'd left near the central column, kneeling to check their remaining supplies. 2 nutrient tubes, half a flask of filtered water, 3 heat pads. No medical-grade fuel, no ammo, no way out until the storm passed. We'll need to ration what's left, he said, mostly to himself. Is it dangerous? She asked, after a long pause. Her voice wasn't as raw this time. Still soft, still wary, but it no longer trembled. The cold? Always, Lior said, glancing at her. The dome won't hold much longer. That fracture's growing. She looked down at the fire, at the flicker reflected in the floor, then said something he hadn't expected. You don't speak like the others. He paused, turning a half-used thermal cell in his hand. No? No, she said. You speak, like someone who knows how to be quiet. He looked at her fully now. You learn to be quiet, he said, when the things you love are taken from you while you're talking. She didn't ask what that meant, didn't need to. It was in the way he said it, like it had already been carved out of him long ago. Instead, she walked toward the small pile of salvaged blankets and crouched beside the fire again. Her knees trembled slightly as she folded herself down, but she didn't show pain, just exhaustion. Lior sat across from her, resting his back against the cold stone base of an old sculpture mount. The statue was gone, probably stolen or destroyed during the panic evacuation. All that remained was a bronze plate etched in 4 languages. We build where others burn. The irony wasn't lost on him. She watched him read it. That wasn't true, she said. They burned too. When they left, you remember the evacuation? He asked. She shook her head. I wasn't part of it. I was already here. They didn't know what to do with me. They left me chained. A silence dropped between them like a wall. Lior didn't ask the next question. Didn't need to. Her presence here, alive, was answer enough. Somehow, she had survived. Did they know? He asked quietly. What your kind really are? She pulled the coat tighter around her, arms hidden beneath the sleeves. They didn't care. Fear made it easier not to ask. And now? She hesitated. Then, now I don't know what I am. I think I stopped being anything a long time ago. Lior leaned his head back against the column, closing his eyes for a moment. You're not nothing, he said. I feel like it. Feeling and truth don't always line up. She didn't respond. The storm pressed harder outside. Snow packed against the outer walls, dulling the wind into a low, constant pressure hum. Somewhere, an old pipe groaned under the shift. Do you have a name? She asked after a while. You already asked that. No, she said. You told me what you were called. That's different. Lior opened his eyes, looked at her. She wasn't playing word games. She meant it. He took a breath. I used to be someone, Lior Nyen, artist, witness. Then I saw something I couldn't unsee, something done in the name of peace. I spoke out. They silenced me. She blinked. They? The ones who commissioned my work, governments, corporations. I painted for them. I didn't know I was helping hide the blood. You told the truth? I tried. And they punished you for it? Number worse. They ignored it. She absorbed that in silence, then nodded slowly, as if she understood that kind of erasure all too well. They said my people were weapons, she murmured, because we could reflect what we sensed, echo the emotions of others. It wasn't control, it was connection. But they couldn't handle the mirror. He stared at her. That's why they chained you. It wasn't fear of what I could do. It was fear of what they might feel if I stayed free. He looked down at his hands, scarred, cold, still trembling sometimes, even years later. He thought of the paintings he'd burned, the ones he didn't have the strength to look at anymore. She noticed the way he went still. You carry it too, she said. I try not to. Trying isn't the same as succeeding. Another silence, but it didn't feel like retreat. It felt like recognition. After a long while, Lior stood and crossed to the far wall. He pried loose a metal panel, behind which he'd seen the shimmer of a vent line. Warm air still pulsed faintly through it, heat from somewhere deeper in the facility, maybe from the old generator buried beneath the administrative wing. He returned and slid the vent panel near the base of the fire pit. Warmer now, he said. She glanced toward the panel, then him. Thank you. She hesitated, then pulled the coat tighter again and lay down, this time not against the wall but closer to the fire. Lior didn't join her. He stayed sitting, sketchpad in his lap. He flipped to the next page, started to draw again. Not her face, not yet. Just the curve of a shoulder, the line of a sleeping body wrapped in a coat. Quiet, alive, and not alone. The storm outside raged on, but inside they stayed in the warmth, not speaking. Not because they feared words, but because they had finally begun to hear each other without them. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was thicker than before. Outside the fractured dome, the snow lay heavy, a smothering layer that sealed the world shut. But inside, within the broken bones of a dream called Artis L4, the fire still burned. Lior had just finished boiling a flask of melted snow. Steam rose in soft curls, vanishing into the chill air as he handed the container to her. She took it without hesitation this time. Her hands, still faintly blue at the knuckles, were steadier now. The coat he'd given her hung more naturally around her frame, as if she no longer expected it to be taken away. Lior watched her drink. Her lips pressed to the rim with care, like she wasn't used to holding something warm. When she finished, she closed her eyes for a breath. And then, with a voice quiet but certain, she said, "My name is Sanvi." He didn't move, didn't speak right away. But he heard it, the way she gave it like a secret, not a title. A name buried so long it had almost gone sour in the dark. He gave a small nod. Sanvi. She looked at him. That was the name I was given before they put a tag on my wrist and called me dangerous. Before the silence. Before the fear. What was it before? He asked. She hesitated. Her gaze dropped to the cracked floor. I was born on a satellite colony, east of the Triadine Rift. The Thalian homeworld had already fallen by then. Most of my people were scattered, refugees or captured. My mother died when I was very young. My father, he was one of the last artists of our kind. Lior leaned forward, elbows on his knees, listening. He told stories with his hands, she said, her fingers mimicking the shapes of air. We don't draw like you, we imprint. We leave emotion in the material. Stone, clay, even sound. If it holds memory, it can hold us. Memory sculpture, Lior murmured. I've read about it. One of your pieces caused an ambassador to collapse from grief during an exhibition. Sanvi nodded faintly. Because it was real. We don't make things to impress. We make them to release. What happened to your father? They came for him after his last commission. Said the piece had destabilizing psychological resonance. They didn't want people to feel what he had carved. They feared the wrong things, Lior said. No, she replied. They feared the right thing. They feared remembering. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. I was 15 when they took me, she continued. I hadn't even shaped my first full piece. I could barely hold a resonance, but they tested me anyway, hooked me to machines, asked me to demonstrate. Lior clenched his jaw. He didn't speak. Eventually, she said, they realized I didn't need to show anything. Just being near them made them uncomfortable. I was mirroring their thoughts without meaning to, their guilt, their fear. So they sedated me, labeled me, contained me, and brought you here. Yes, I was transferred between 4 colonies in 2 years. But when the funding for the Artis L4 project collapsed, the researchers were recalled. The support staff were told to evacuate immediately. There were too many inconvenient variables. So they left me, told the last technician to let the cold take care of it. He couldn't do it, so he chained me and walked away. She touched her throat. The collar was gone now, but the memory of it lived just beneath the skin. Lior stared into the fire. I've seen those kinds of orders, he said, the bureaucratic kind, the ones that kill slowly, through neat wording and perfect signatures. She looked at him. Her voice was softer now. And you? What did you lose? Lior exhaled slowly. My story doesn't begin with chains, he said, but it ends with fire. He rubbed the side of his hand against his jaw, scraping the week-old stubble there, as if he could rub the memory away. I was a painter, commissioned across the inner systems. I was known for war murals, huge pieces, abstract but visceral. I made carnage beautiful. They liked that. They? She asked, though she already knew the answer. The politicians, the buyers, the ones who needed art to make destruction palatable. I was their darling. I got special transport routes, safe corridors, first access to frontline imagery. They let me see everything, as long as I painted it just right. He shook his head. But then I saw something I couldn't frame. A colony, freshly bombed, not by aliens, not by monsters, by our own forces, under the guise of cleansing a psionic threat. Children were burned in the shelters. Murals I'd painted were blackened on the walls behind them. Sanvi's voice dropped into a whisper. And they blamed someone? They called it an unfortunate convergence of events. I called it murder. I spoke, loudly, publicly. They buried me in silence, cut funding, pulled commissions. Then they turned my older works into propaganda again, sliced the context, erased the captions. He reached into his bag, pulled out a small canvas fragment sealed in protective foil. It was burned at the edges, smudged with ash, but still visible. A single blue eye painted in intricate, trembling detail. Sanvi stared. I painted this from memory, Lior said, from a refugee girl who looked at me while the world fell behind her. It wasn't me, she said. But it could have been. He nodded. I kept it, he said. After I burned the rest. Sanvi touched the edge of the canvas with trembling fingers. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, she looked up. So this place, it wasn't just where you came to die. Lior shook his head. I came here hoping that if there was one painting left on these walls, I could look at it and see if it was crying. A breath escaped her lips. Something between a laugh and a sob. You thought the art would weep? I thought I would. Her hand moved, almost without thinking, and rested gently over his. She didn't flinch, and neither did he. I think, she said, we both forgot how to be seen. And now? She looked around at the cracked dome, the failed utopia, the dim firelight catching the lines of her face. I think, she said softly, we're still here. Lior didn't respond with words. He just let her hand stay on his. For the first time, the silence didn't ache. It held them, together. The quiet didn't feel safe anymore. It felt wrong. Lior woke with a sharp intake of breath, every instinct alert before his eyes had adjusted to the gray morning light. The air had shifted, too still, too cold. The fire had died sometime in the early hours, and the faintest pressure pressed against his eardrums. Not sound exactly, a hum. A tremor through the stone beneath him. He reached for the scanner, fingers steady despite the cold. A slow pulse rolled across the screen. Faint, 3 blips, triangulating, closing. He didn't need to see more. Raiders. They'd found the colony. Lior swung his legs over the side of the platform and gritted his teeth against the jolt of pain in his ankle. It hadn't worsened, but the swelling was tight now. He tightened the makeshift wrap, hissed quietly, and stood. Sanvi stirred behind him. She hadn't slept as deeply as she had the night before. Something in the atmosphere must have warned her too. She sat up, pushing her hair out of her eyes. What is it? He didn't answer right away, just handed her the scanner. She looked. Her face didn't change, but he saw the way her body stilled. How long? They'll breach the outer corridor within 15 minutes, maybe less. She nodded. No panic, no questions, just movement. They both gathered what little they had: blankets, the med kit, the sketch pad. Lior pressed one of the remaining heat pads against his side beneath his jacket, not for comfort, but to keep the muscles from locking. He led her toward the far end of the old dome, where a partial collapse had created a tangled mess of scaffolding and debris. It wasn't ideal, but it was narrow enough to be defensible and hidden enough to stay unseen. As they crouched behind a curved girder, Sanvi turned to him. "I'll stay out of sight, but if they get close—" "No," he cut in, voice low. "You're not bait. You're not backup." Her jaw clenched. "I'm not helpless." "I know." He looked at her, really looked. "But you're not expendable either." That silenced her more than anything. She nodded once and melted back into the shadows. Lior slipped away in the opposite direction, low and fast, moving through fractured walkways and hollow corridors that groaned faintly underfoot. He reached a vantage point on a collapsed stairwell overlooking the colony's main passage just as the first shape came into view. Tall, broad, armor-clad. Not scavengers, professionals. The visor pulsed red, scanning. A pulse rifle hung loose at the man's side, relaxed but ready. Two more followed behind, lighter gear, less poise. Mercs, maybe, freelancers. But they moved like they'd done this before. Lior dropped lower, silent, and activated the signal jammer he'd salvaged from a drone casing 2 days earlier. Weak, but enough to scramble short-range communications. The lead merc stopped. "Signal drop," he muttered through the helmet comm. The second one scanned again. "Could be tech interference. Cold spike messed with the array." "Or bait," the third replied. They moved slower now, more deliberate. Lior shifted his weight, judging the angle. The longer they lingered, the more likely they were to sweep the dome. And Sanvi was in there, unarmed, exhausted, exposed. He couldn't let that happen. He fired. One shot. The lead merc dropped, center mass. The other two scattered, ducking into cover. Return fire hissed through the cold, bright blue bursts that tore through the upper level. Steam plumed as the blasts hit frost-covered walls, shattering stone and steel. Lior moved, fast. He dove across the corridor, tucking into a service hatch just as a bolt screamed past his head. He fired again, grazed one of them, enough to slow them, not enough to stop them. A sharp hiss burst behind him. A voice barked into a comm unit. The signal jammer had failed. They knew now there was someone else here, someone defending. One of them moved to flank. Lior spun, heart pounding, every breath raw from the freezing air. His side screamed with pain now, the wraps soaked with sweat and blood where the old wound had torn. He ducked into another tunnel, this one narrower, leading toward the outer wing. He needed distance. A sharp impact slammed into his side. He went down hard. A boot landed in his ribs before he could rise. Pain flared white behind his eyes. The last merc leaned down, weapon raised. "Got you now." Lior didn't answer, but the air behind them shifted. Sanvi stepped out from the shadows. Her eyes burned, not with fury, but with clarity. The merc turned, blinked, and froze. He staggered, weapon dropping a centimeter. His breathing changed, shallow, hiccuped. "What?" he whispered. "What is this?" His hands trembled. Lior watched it happen, not in the air, but in the man himself. His arrogance drained, his bravado cracked, and beneath it something surfaced. Fear. The kind he thought he'd buried long ago. Sanvi didn't speak, didn't move. She just stood there and let him feel. It broke him. The merc dropped his weapon, knees buckling. Lior reached for his revolver, fired once. Silence fell again. The body slumped to the ground, steaming faintly in the cold. Sanvi's breath was shallow and her hands shook now. She looked at Lior. "I didn't reach into him," she said softly. "I just mirrored what was already there." He didn't answer. Couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he stood wincing and stepped toward her. "You shouldn't have followed me. You shouldn't have gone alone." They stood there, inches apart, two people stitched together by fear and adrenaline and something else unspoken. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get out of here." They climbed back through the tunnels, moving slowly. Lior's body throbbed with pain. Sanvi kept close, one hand at his back when he stumbled. By the time they reached the dome, dusk had returned, soft orange light filtering through ice-rimmed cracks. The fire pit still smoldered faintly. They collapsed beside it, breathless and aching. Sanvi took a water pouch from the pack and pressed it into his hand. He drank, then handed it back. For a while they said nothing. Then, "Why did you do it?" he asked. Her eyes lifted. "Because when you looked at me, you didn't see a weapon." Lior reached into his coat, pulled out the sketch pad, flipped it open to the last page. He hadn't meant to draw during the chaos, but he had. Sanvi's face, half lit, half lost in shadow. Her eyes steady, her jaw set, not afraid, not broken, alive. She stared at the image. Then she looked at him. "You kept seeing me even when I disappeared." "I couldn't stop," she exhaled. "I don't know what happens next." "Neither do I." But he leaned forward, slow and careful, his hand brushing hers again. And this time, when he kissed her, she kissed him back. It wasn't fire, it was warmth, quiet and certain, chosen. And in that ruined dome on a dead planet, they held each other, not because they were survivors, but because they had decided to live. Lior awoke to the sound of wind brushing against the dome's edge, a softer wind than before, not angry, just present. He opened his eyes slowly. The pain in his side had dulled, but the ache in his ankle still pulsed, tight and stubborn beneath the binding. His body was stiff, joints reluctant to move. He'd lost more energy than he could afford. They both had, but they were still here. The fire had burned low, but not out. A thin column of smoke drifted lazily into the fractured ceiling. Sanvi sat near the edge of the pit, knees tucked under her coat, hair gathered behind her in a loose knot. She was humming. Not a melody he recognized, if it was even a melody. The sound moved like breath, soft and non-linear, not quite rising, not quite falling. It felt like the kind of sound that belonged in a gallery with no lights, a vibration rather than a song. He didn't interrupt her, not yet. Instead, he sat up, grimacing at the pull in his ribs. The bandage was damp, but not bleeding through. He'd need to rewrap it today. Maybe scavenge antiseptic if any could still be found in the med station 3 levels down. He ran a hand through his hair and took a long breath. Sanvi turned slightly when she heard him move. Her expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders eased. "I found a ration pack," she said, "behind one of the crates in the back storeroom." Lior blinked, surprised. She held up the wrapper, a heat-sealed protein sheet with faded Galactic Food Authority markings. Old, but still viable. She'd already split it in 2. "You should eat first," she added. "You're still healing." He took the half she offered and nodded his thanks. They ate in silence. The protein was dense, flavorless. Sanvi wrinkled her nose as she chewed, but didn't complain. It wasn't about taste anymore. It was about staying alive. When they finished, Lior used the last of their meltwater to clean the knife and rewrap his ribs. Sanvi watched without comment, but her eyes tracked every movement, measuring how he winced, how he favored his right arm. "You should rest again," she said when he was done. "I've rested enough." "You haven't. You keep watching over me when you should be sleeping." He gave a quiet half smile. "Habit. It's not one you should keep. I don't think I know how to break it." She didn't argue, just stood, brushed the dust from her hands, and moved to the far wall where an exposed panel of wiring gleamed faintly under the firelight. She crouched beside it, prying gently at the conduit casing. Lior raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" She didn't look back. "Thinking. Dangerous. Necessary." He rose slowly and limped over, settling beside her. The conduit was old, part of the emergency distribution loop. A few of the wires were burned out, but one still pulsed with low residual current. "I've been mapping the power bleed," Sanvi said, almost to herself. "There's a line that still runs beyond the dome. South wing, down into the sub-storage zone." "That part's collapsed," Lior said. "Mostly, but not all the way." He frowned. "You've been checking this while I slept?" "Yes." He didn't know whether to be impressed or worried, but he felt a strange warmth in his chest all the same. "You're looking for a way out," he said. "I'm looking for a way forward," she corrected. She turned to him. Her eyes were calm, unwavering. "You said once you came here to see if art could mourn." He nodded. "But maybe now it's time to ask if it can build again." That silenced him. For the first time since they met, she wasn't only surviving, she was planning. Later, they ventured into the sub-corridors. Not deep, just far enough to confirm what Sanvi had suspected. The secondary grid was active, barely. A faint hum vibrated through the frost-laced walls, and beneath the far platform, half buried under snow and structural debris, they found it. A ship, small, crude, built for atmosphere and short-range planetary transitions, not the kind of vessel that could cross systems, but it was intact. Cerulean paint flecked the outer hull, the name still legible, Cerulean Fox. Lior knelt beside the access panel, brushing away ice. "I saw these back in the Trident fields," he said. "Courier craft. Used to run art manifests between installations." Sanvi crouched opposite, resting her fingers against the metal. "You think it'll fly?" "It's not pretty," he said, "but I think it might." They spent the rest of the day hauling what tools they could find from the maintenance bay. The cold slowed them. Every motion burned with effort, and Lior's leg dragged with more stiffness than before. But they didn't stop. By dusk, the power relays were reconnected. The internal systems flickered once, then held. Warmth bloomed inside the cabin, subtle, faint, but real. Lior sank into the co-pilot's chair and exhaled. Sanvi stood at the open hatch, staring out across the ruins. "I never thought I'd leave this place." "You're not running," he said. "No." She turned to face him. "I'm choosing." Lior reached out his hand. "Then let's choose together." She took it. That night, back in the dome for one last rest, they sat side by side beside the fire. The light caught on the walls around them, making the old murals shimmer faintly under the dust. Faded faces, broken wings, empty eyes. But they no longer looked like failures. They looked like ghosts laid to rest. Sanvi leaned her head on Lior's shoulder, not to escape the cold, just to be close. "I used to think no one would ever look at me again without fear," she whispered. "You were wrong." "And you?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "I thought I'd never make anything worth saving again." She turned her face into his shoulder. Her breath was warm. "Then we both forgot who we were." "No," Lior said. "We just needed to remember each other first." The fire crackled, and outside the stars began to rise, cold, sharp, distant, but no longer unreachable. The wind was finally still. No more howling, no more moaning through fractured corridors or shrieking through broken glass. Only silence. The kind that didn't feel like danger anymore. Lior stood at the edge of the sub-platform where the Cerulean Fox rested, its blue hull now free of snow, half glinting in the soft dawn light. The vessel was patched, rewired, flight-ready. He wasn't sure how long he'd been staring at it. He only knew that this time, he didn't feel the urge to run. Behind him, footsteps approached, quiet, careful, and unhurried. Sanvi stopped beside him. She said nothing at first. She just stood there, her breath visible in the cold eyes on the ship. "It looks smaller now," she murmured. Lior nodded. "It is. Or maybe we're just bigger than we were when we found it." She glanced at him. "You slept last night." "I did." "First time since you arrived?" "Yeah." He paused, then added, "You?" She nodded slowly. "It wasn't just sleep, it was rest. That's different." There was a weight to her voice now. Not heaviness, but depth. She sounded grounded, real in a way she hadn't before, not brittle, not fractured, simply present. Lior exhaled, slow and full. "I've been thinking," he said. "If we launch, we'll have to head toward the trade line between the Sigiran Drift and the neutral sectors. The Fox can't make long-range jumps. But if we hit a refueling point, we'll make it," she interrupted, not as a reassurance, but a truth. He looked at her. She met his gaze without hesitation. "People out there still think your species is a threat." "I know. They'll scan you, question everything. You won't be able to hide what you are." "I'm not going to hide anymore." That silenced him. She stepped forward, resting a hand on the hull. "When they chained me here, they expected me to die, not just physically, spiritually. They wanted what was inside me to rot away until there was nothing left but obedience. Silence." She turned her hand over, palm up. "But I didn't, because I remembered my name. And then I heard yours." He looked at her open palm, scarred, blue-veined, alive. He took it, not gently, not as if she were fragile, but as if she were real. They stood there in the quiet, two survivors holding hands beside a patched-together vessel, with more rust than grace. And it was enough. Takeoff was rough. The Cerulean Fox groaned as her thrusters came online, engines sputtering before they caught. Dust exploded from the undercarriage as snow melted instantly, revealing the launch grid beneath. Lior sat in the pilot's chair, jaw clenched, hands gripping the controls harder than necessary. Sanvi sat beside him, strapped in, her fingers on the auxiliary power relay. "You've done this before?" she asked. He smirked. number. But I've seen someone else do it once. That's comforting. The ship lurched. Sanvi braced herself as a metal screech echoed through the underframe. Are we breaking? Not yet. Another jolt. Then a sudden rush of lift. G-forces pushed them back into their seats as the ship rose above the colony. And then, weightlessness. Clouds. Pale sky. The sun blooming across the ice sheet below. Artis L4 shrank beneath them, its shattered domes and rusted spires slowly giving way to a smooth, white horizon. Lior said nothing, but Sanvi reached across and placed her hand over his. He gripped it without thinking, not out of fear, out of confirmation, that they'd done it. They didn't speak much during orbit. The system's edge flickered faintly in the distance, navigation buoys pulsing through the dark. There would be interference ahead, and the comms array needed calibration. Fuel levels were just below half. They would need a dock soon, but none of that felt urgent. Inside the cabin, there was silence again, not the silence of isolation, the silence of two people no longer bracing for survival. Lior leaned back in his chair, watching her as she gazed through the viewport. Her expression was unreadable, but her breathing was calm, rhythmic, a stillness not born of restraint but peace. I don't know what comes next, he said finally. Sanvi turned toward him. That's the point. He raised an eyebrow. We get to decide it. She smiled, soft and genuine. I don't want to run anymore, she said. Then we don't. He reached for the sketch pad. It was worn, edges curled, pages loose from age and use. But he flipped to a clean sheet and began to draw, not because he needed to capture anything, but because his hands had finally remembered what they were made for. He drew the curve of a ship against a rising moon. A girl with black hair sitting in a pilot's seat, her eyes reflecting stars. And in the corner, a hand holding another. No weapons, no chains, just choice. Later, as the ship hummed through space, and the stars stretched ahead of them like a river of light, Sanvi leaned her head against his shoulder. They didn't need to speak. The universe was vast, uncertain, full of ghosts and ruin and memory. But it was also full of paths yet drawn, and they had survived. Not to run, not to hide, but to make something, to begin again, together. The planet they landed on had no name, at least not one that mattered anymore. It was listed in the long-forgotten trade archives as E71104, a terraformed agricultural moon that had once served as a refueling and rest stop for long-haul convoys. Now it was empty, but it wasn't dead. The air was cold, crisp, breathable. The light was gentle, refracted through high-altitude mist that painted the sky in shades of silver and pale blue. Grass had returned in patches. Thin, frost-hardened moss grew in fractured cracks between abandoned structures. And just beyond the eastern ridge, a cluster of dormant wind turbines creaked softly in the breeze, still turning. Lior stepped out of the ship first. The air bit at his lungs, but it was clean. He inhaled slowly. The weight in his chest, an old thing made of grief and unfinished stories, didn't tighten this time. Behind him, the hatch hissed open, and Sanvi stepped down. She was wrapped in one of the salvaged coats they'd repurposed. Her hair had been tied back, clean and damp from the rationed water they'd boiled that morning. The cold kissed her cheeks, and for the first time since he'd met her, Lior saw her smile without hesitation. No fear, no flinch, just sunlight and space and breath. They walked without speaking, boots crunching over cracked stone and dry frost, past the ruins of what had once been a greenhouse ring. Rusted arches curled upward like the bones of a forgotten cathedral, and yet something still bloomed here, a stubborn vine, curling through a broken pane, dotted with pale lavender buds. Sanvi touched one gently, and her voice came like mist. It's beautiful, she said. It shouldn't be alive, Lior replied, but it is. She looked up at him. So are we. They walked until the hill began to rise, until the world behind them shrank and the sky opened in full. There, on a flat outcropping beneath an old comms tower, they stopped. Sanvi sat first, pulling her knees to her chest and letting the breeze catch her hair. Lior sat beside her. Not too close. Not yet. They watched the wind turbines spin lazily in the distance. Somewhere, a bird, an actual bird, called out across the ridge. Not a drone, not a siren. Just life, uncoded and unscripted. I didn't think freedom would be so quiet, she said after a while. Lior rested his arms over his knees. I didn't think I'd still be afraid after I found it. She turned toward him. You are? Yes, he admitted. Not of the world. Not of dying. Then what? Of stopping. Of letting myself feel too much again. Sanvi didn't speak immediately, but when she did, her words were soft and unshaken. I was afraid of being touched, not because I thought it would hurt, but because I couldn't tell if I would vanish the moment someone did. She looked down at her hands. For so long, the only thing I understood was how to disappear inside myself. Even after you found me, part of me stayed chained. Lior turned to face her fully. And now? She looked up. I'm still learning how to stay here, to be real. Her eyes were steady. But I want to be. Lior didn't move yet. His hand hovered inches from hers. This isn't something I expect, he said. Not after what they took from you. They didn't take everything, she replied. Don't rush because I'm here. I'm not rushing, she said. She took his hand. I'm arriving. The wind moved around them like breath. Lior turned toward her and she didn't look away. Not this time. No hesitation, no tremor. Just two people sitting on a hill, under a sky that didn't demand anything of them, in a world that didn't remember what they'd survived. He leaned in slowly, and she met him halfway. The kiss was not desperate, not a relief, not a breaking point. It was quiet, deliberate, a choosing. It lingered, soft, anchored, filled with all the things neither of them had words for. Not passion, but presence. Not need, but promise. When they parted, Sanvi didn't look down. She let him see her, all of her. And Lior, for the first time, didn't feel like a man carrying ghosts. He felt like a man who had finally put one down. They stayed on that hill for hours, speaking sometimes, silent often. Their shoulders brushed when the wind blew harder. Their fingers remained intertwined without pressure. Later, they gathered old solar tiles from the ruins, propped up a temporary field shelter, and boiled water over a new fire. Sanvi traced symbols in the dirt with a stick, her people's script, long forgotten by most of the galaxy. Lior asked what it meant. She smiled. Tomorrow. When night fell, they didn't go back into the ship. They slept beneath the stars, two figures under salvaged blankets, side by side in the open, breathing the same cold air. Sanvi slept without fear. Lior slept without guilt. And in the sky above them, far from memory, a satellite blinked once and kept turning.